Hi, I'm Kara-Leah from the Yoga Lunchbox, and today I'm stoked to be talking to Katy Carter, who is an Auckland-based yoga teacher. Welcome, Katy.
Thanks, Kara-Leah. It's a pleasure to be on here with you.
Now, Katy has been practicing yoga for more than 16 years, and she started teaching in 2008, and you'll find her all over Auckland, teaching everywhere from studios to gyms. I know it's about 10 classes a week. She is also hosting a retreat at Mana, which is coming up at the end of December, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And in her time, Katy has studied with other teachers such as Katie Lane, Donna Farey, Mark Whitwell, Sarah Powers, who else is on my list here? John Scott from down in the South Island, and Annie Carpenter, plus several more. That's a whole lot of teachers, Katy.
It is. I certainly have had a bit of a variety of yoga over the course of my studentship in yoga. And it's really been a wonderful journey exploring all these different kind of aspects of yoga in so many different ways with such great teachers.
What's been a standout experience for you over the years in terms of teachers or workshops, or because you've done a lot of different things? So
I have, yeah. So I started very simply with yoga. It was very much a hatha practice with some very straightforward teachers that I met in London. And as my practice kind of slowly grew and I began to do a bit more yoga here and there, I began to be a bit more interested in kind of, more richness within the practice. And so and as my needs shifted as a student as well, I started to look for particular kinds of yoga. At first, it was a very dynamic practice, so the Ashtanga practice was really important to me. And then as things shifted and as life got more stressful or I was more exhausted, then I started to look for the quieter practices as well. And I was introduced to the Yin yoga style quite early on in my practice in London, which was a really great opportunity to meet people like Sarah Powers, who were working in London when she came through, and just starting to kind of diversify the way that I treated myself within my yoga practice was a really lovely, rich experience. Rather than just making it all very physical, that it became a kind of deeper, more internal practice and looking at different aspects of how to treat the body as well.
One thing I found quite curious about you is, and maybe it was on your bio page, I read this, you almost didn't start yoga because you didn't think that you were flexible enough.
No, absolutely. I'd heard all my friends, well, not all my friends, some of my friends who were more enlightened than me got there first, and they'd been practicing for years since they lived in New Zealand. And I knew these friends in London, and they had a really solid practice, which I didn't know really anything about, but I knew that I was really curious about it. I had been a very kind of physically active person. I really liked to take care of myself, thinking that I was fit and strong. And so going to the gym a lot and doing all sorts of other, exercises and cycling and things like that. So I loved that. I loved to swim because I really liked that sort of meditative quality about it and that overall feeling that you got. But I didn't kind of equate that with what I was looking for in yoga. I just felt like it was a terribly flexible practice and I wanted to try it. So I got up the courage one day to go along with a work colleague, and neither of us had any experience, and I really didn't know what to expect. So I just kind of opened my mind to it and did what I could on the mat. And I was quite protective of my head and neck because I'd had an injury as a child that sort of still gave me trouble, and I'd suffered a lot of migraines through my life. So I was very protective of that area of my body. And therefore, we were kind of thrown into a headstand. When I say thrown, we were invited into a headstand in that first class. And I was like, okay, it's now or never. And I just went straight up into it, which was really surprising to me. And from that moment, everything kind of changed. I was like, okay, I can't resist this anymore. There are things that I am capable of that I'm denying myself. And, yoga's pretty interesting to invite me into that place. So I was kind of hooked from the first class, really.
So overall then, what was your body like when you started yoga, and how has it shifted and changed during your practice?
Oh, such a huge transformation. I was quite fit and strong because, as I said, I was doing a lot of gym work at the time, which, I was never really very engaged with the gym culture, but I liked to go and do exercise to feel like I was fit. I had a very physical job at that point. I was working in a lot of restaurants when I was early on in London, and I also worked on film production, so I was extremely, flat out in most of my work. And I had really tight shoulders, head and neck, and, everything was quite stiff. I had really short hamstrings from cycling all over the city. So I was a super tight person when I started. I was not flexible at all. Touching my toes was kind of a little bit far away. And it took me a long time. It took me years to actually get to the point where I felt like I could, touch my toes without really feeling excruciating through the hamstrings to do that. And so, yeah, the physical aspects of the practice were slow to come. It was like a slow burner, and it took me a long time to learn how to be really aware of my body. I thought I was quite aware, but until you start getting on the mat and really practicing just listening to yourself and becoming more mindful, I was used to that physicality of movement, but it took me a long time to really be conscious of how I was doing things and what I was doing there. Yeah. So, yeah, really, really slow, long time. Now it's really changed. That shifted over the course of the first sort of 10 years that I did yoga. And that sounds like a long time. I sort of pinch myself still and think, wow, I've been doing this now for 16 years. And it's really an amazing thing to be able to carry with you all that time. I don't think I've done anything else in my life for 16 years. Yeah. Except some really basic things, and it is a wonderful kind of journey that's really transformed how I do the practice and what I get from the practice. It's not so much the physical practice, although I still enjoy that. That's my kind of tendency, that's my nature, but it has become a much more internal practice for me over the years, in that I've become much more grounded and centered and a much nicer person. I think I listened to one of your other interviews on here, and I was listening to Peter Sterios saying he's become a much nicer person. I'm like, yeah, that's me. I think I've become much kinder to myself, and therefore, that flows out into every other aspect of my life. Yeah.
So how has your personal experience and then all the different teachers that you've studied with, how has that informed your teaching? And what is it that you really are teaching people in a class?
That's a really great question. Because there's been so many different threads that I've drawn from all the different types of study and the people that I've studied with, and it's really evolved as my consciousness about myself, as my understanding of myself as a whole person has evolved as well. And that's really shifted dramatically with the yoga practice. The way that I teach really draws on lots of different really juicy aspects of those different teachings and different practices that they've offered to me. And what's been most benefit to me, that's what I love to share with my students. So sometimes it'll be about just being kind to yourself. We spend so much of our daily life really pushing ourselves through work, through our obligations, through our daily life, all of the responsibilities that we're juggling, and just taking the time to actually step onto the mat or step into a space, maybe it's meditation or maybe it's yoga, where you can actually just sit within yourself and really feel yourself at that moment and really understand what that feeling is like. For me, that's probably the biggest factor of my practice now, just pausing and really feeling where you are. Because everything just gets so scattered. Your energy is so scattered in so many directions, particularly as women. I can't speak for men because I haven't had that experience in my life of being that person, but I'm sure it's pretty similar. We're all pretty stretched to our maximum. So actually coming back to yourself and just feeling your way into yourself. It's no longer about, for me, how far I can go in a pose or how much I can tie my leg behind my head or anything, but it's how I feel in each moment in the practice that's the most important.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you're speaking, I'm hearing a lot of the themes that are coming out of the retreat that you're teaching. So let's have a chat about that retreat, because it sounds exciting. And it's also a little bit bold, because this retreat happens between December 26th and 30th, right?
That's right, yeah.
Right, and it's called The Space Between Pause, Presence, and Potent Possibilities. So it's right between Christmas and New Year's. It's at Mana Retreat. So we'll talk about Mana first, because I have never been there, and I noticed that, a few teachers hold retreats there. So why did you decide to hold your retreat at Mana?
Mana is a pretty special place to me already, and I've just been this weekend. I've had the privilege of going down there for a little sneaky relaxation weekend, which again was grabbing an opportunity that I wouldn't normally give myself, just to pause, just to really stop, switch everything off, disconnect from all the technology, and just come back to relax. It felt a bit naughty, but God, it's so reminds you how difficult it is for us to give ourselves permission to do that. Mm-hmm. So Mana is a wonderful, wonderful location that's so close to Auckland City. It's a really valuable place to know about. And I went there for the first time about 2 or 3 years ago. I went to another teacher's retreat weekend that happens annually. And I went along because I knew the teacher, and I really needed a little bit of time out to go and just, invest that time into my practice and just being with myself rather than kind of giving all the energy out. So Mana, it's situated in the Coromandel, in the hills just above the coastline as you come along from Thames, heading towards the Coromandel township. And it's a really incredibly special place. It's seated in the rolling hills beneath a mountain that's a really majestic piece of landscape in itself. And it's a charitable trust. So the co-founders and co-owners of the property decided on this site, rather than selecting something that was down on the coastline where you would perhaps be a little bit distracted by the presence of the sea and the beach and wanting to kind of get down there and into the ocean. But so you can look out to sea in the most expansive views, looking out to rolling hills in the distance. And it gives you this incredible energy of really being a part of the kind of universe around you, being a part of the world, and your situation within that. You feel really humbled by that landscape. And so the retreat center is built in a very kind of ecological and sustainable way. It has wonderful organic gardens. There's a real richness to the landscape there. There's wonderful lush native bush. There's the mountain up behind you. And just below that mountain, there's a beautiful, beautiful little sanctuary that's been built, complete with bells that ring, and it's a completely non-religious kind of little structure, but it just feels very special, very spiritual, if you like to look at it in that way. And it looks out over the Firth of Thames, so you see this sparkling sea beyond the windows of it, and little islands, and it's almost like being in Greece or Turkey. It's very evocative of something much greater, more kind of global than just being in New Zealand. But here it is, right in New Zealand, and it's just got this amazing presence to it as well, being in that landscape. There's apparently lots of energy lines that converge where they've situated the retreat center itself. If you like to get really mystical about it, I'm not so sure about all of those things, but I just know that the feeling when you arrive there is spectacular. And it feels like a place where you can just come home and just land in the landscape and get really grounded.
Because it's actually on 120 hectares of land, isn't it?
It's a huge piece of land that is, really, really carefully thought out, really beautifully designed. So there's lots of wide open space, these rolling hills that kind of cascade down from the retreat center. You can walk up to the mountain through a beautiful bushwalk. There's lots of little tracks all throughout the property, so there's lots of places to discover.
Sounds like you can get lost there.
You can get lost, and you can kind of get lost in yourself.
Yeah.
Or you can just kind of also stay within the retreat complex itself. It's kind of spread out. There's lots of tracks to walk up to the accommodation, but everything is very centralized with the retreat center, which is sitting in the most beautiful part of the site and looking straight out to the hugest view. It's absolutely panoramic.
Okay, now I understand why you're doing a 5-day retreat there.
Oh, look, just to have that luxury of going somewhere that you don't have to fly anywhere unless you're coming from somewhere within New Zealand itself, or you've arrived from overseas. Once you arrive at Mana, you literally don't want to leave. It's just that real nourishing quality of coming back to the land. Even if that land is not familiar to you, there's something particular about this site that makes you feel like you've been there before. And certainly after the first day that you've arrived and let go of the kind of the cloak of your urban life or whatever you've come from, as soon as you come up the beautiful driveway that's kind of tree lined, you feel like you're entering somewhere really special. You feel like you're really arriving away from the outside world. It's in the true sense of a retreat.
So what inspired you to host a retreat December 26th to December 30th? Because to me that seems kind of bold, but also kind of perfect, that time frame.
Yeah, it's curious, isn't it? It kind of is intriguing to think about that time, not as a time between the shops have shut and the Christmas celebrations are over and what are we going to do to New Year's? Because that's when I lived in London for many years. That's kind of what you had to contend with, and often there's kind of not a lot on there. Lots of your favorite restaurants are shut, and you've suddenly got all this time because you're not having to work. Because for most people, we're off work at that time. And if you haven't engaged with family at that time of year, then what do you do? If you're a person who doesn't have a summer holiday planned at that time of year, or it's not quite your summer holiday yet, because it's definitely summer in New Zealand. When I lived in the UK, it was a really interesting kind of environment to be in, because I was not connected to family particularly. And a lot of the people that live in London are also disconnected from family. We're sort of
orphans
there. So there would be this possibility to go and spend time doing something that you really wanted to do, and that might not be necessarily just going on a holiday where you sort of switch off and hope to relax, but actually purposely choosing to go and do something to allow yourself to unwind from the stresses of your usual life, from work, from your relationships, from your family, whatever that may be. And I knew of retreats, yoga retreats and meditation retreats that were happening, say, in Ireland and the coast of Ireland and the wilds. And that just so appealed to me, that idea of like getting out of the city or getting out of your routine and going and committing this time. Interestingly for me, the Norwegians have a name for this period between Christmas and New Year. It's called Romjul. I hope I've pronounced that right. And the name means the space between. And I really liked that concept of there being this pause between the end of one year, that rush up to Christmas when we're just frantic, we're spending like crazy, we're working really hard to get everything finished so we can go away during that time. And everything, everything's going to close, so everything sort of speeds up. It becomes so ridiculously chaotic. But then all of a sudden it just stops after Christmas Day. And so what happens with that energy? Do you sort of do you just let it dissipate and kind of cobble something together in those days in between? And then there's this next pinnacle that you've got to kind of face, which is New Year's Eve. And what happens then? People are usually rushing around deciding where they're going to be and what they're going to do. Or you've got to that point in your life where you're like, I'm over it. I just want to go to bed before it reaches 12 o'clock. So, if that speaks to you, that space between, then why not harness that opportunity and really invest that time in creating the intention to let go of what's already been, to let go of what's happened for you throughout the year, not in a way of pushing it away, but acknowledging it, really sitting with it and really letting that digest in a reflective way so that you can begin to look forward into what's going to happen for the next year in a really positive way, in a really, you're ready for it. You want to embrace that potential. And that's why I've subtitled it, Pause, Presence and Potent Possibility. Because there is, that for me, that just sums it up. That little time, somebody called it the perineum of the year, where you're not quite sure which way it's going to go. It's sort of nothing but everything.
Yeah. So will the practices then, or what you're offering on the retreat, it's all going to allow people to let go, to pause, and then to invite in the new?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll... in kind of hosting this retreat, I really want to invite people to come from whatever background they've come from, whatever their experience of yoga or meditation. It may not be much, it may be a lot, to just come as you are with what you've got at that moment and just let yourself see what happens for you in that space. To just let yourself be immersed in this wonderfully held space. Mana Retreat is very well run. They've been doing it since the 80s. They provide a space there, and I hope to really host that space there where you feel really welcome. Even if you've come on your own, you don't know anyone else, by the end of those few days there, you will feel such a part of community. You will have made new connections with people, unexpected connections, sometimes surprising connections. It's the 6 degrees of separation that in New Zealand is reduced to like 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And somebody said something interesting this weekend that I was there, that you just literally, everyone starts there as a kind of closed book without a cover. You really don't know anything about them until you start to open the first few pages, and then you begin to understand a little bit of the story. And we all come with our individual experience of the world and our own stories of what's going on there. But through these practices, these processes that I'm going to offer, and there's going to be lots of space in between those practices as well, just to be yourself, just to really relax, just to really digest the year that you've had, and just to make that kind of calm and quiet so that you can invite in a bit of spaciousness to embrace what's going to happen within the year to come.
Awesome. So how many people is the retreat limited to?
It's limited merely by the accommodation size, really. I would expect there's going to be about 12 to 20 people, so it's not going to be an enormous group. And really, even if there's 20 to 30 people, 30 would probably be our maximum, just because it's nice to keep it, fairly intimate, and so that you can really get a lot of one-on-one attention from me. So no matter where your practice is at, I can offer support with that. There'll be a lot of detail in the yoga so that you understand what you're doing if you're quite new to the practice, but I'll also be able to offer some attention to those people who are fairly regular practitioners and maybe invite a little bit of a fresh lens on your practice there. The meditation as well, if you've never meditated before, if you'd like to meditate a lot, there'll be scope for you to practice, with what you've got, really. There's no dogma about how we're going to run the retreat. It's just really an invitation for you to be just where you are, and for me to meet you on that journey and see if I can support you to really open.
Fantastic. Well, Katy, thank you so much for telling us about yourself and your yoga journey, and also about Mana Retreat. I so have to get there at some point, and about your retreat. If people are interested in booking or signing up, where's the best place to do that?
In the first instance, contact Mana Retreat Centre, and you can Google that. All the information will be on the Yoga Lunchbox website as well, and on my website, which is katycarter.co.nz, and the link to that will be present on the invitation on the flyer for the retreat. So Mana are taking all of the bookings. If you have any questions about it, if you have any questions about pricing or payment, direct those all to Mana. They're very used to handling all of the booking system there. Accommodation is really wonderful as well. It's modest, but it's supremely comfortable. They really ensure that all the little details are taken care of. So, yeah, a really accessible retreat that I hope that it will really appeal to a broad range of people, and, you know, that we can find some confluence in the energy that we share together at the retreat. There's also going to be lots of, as I said, lots of time for you to just take time out. So don't feel like, you know, if you're watching this and thinking, I've never been on a retreat before, I'm not sure if I could do all that much yoga. Yeah. Don't worry, just come and see what you can do. You know, just have a go. I remember my first retreat and I was terrified, but actually, you know, once you're there, it all flows. It's really delicious. So yeah, come to Mana yourself. You will love it. That's the one thing that they told me as well this weekend, is that people who come to Mana, they've never been there before perhaps, but they come back time and time again because it's one of those places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Katy.
Thank you so much, Kara-Leah. It's been wonderful to have this opportunity to share this with you.